We are heading into the final week of the NFL season, and here on the Huddle and Flow, we've got so many great storylines. Jim, we got A.J. Dillon showing up in Green Bay like they got more. Packers got more and a beast of a runner. And I'm just like, man, what they did to Tennessee on Sunday night, Jim.
You know what? Well, the thing that was so telling in that game for me, if you go back to last year or even previous seasons with Green Bay, I think the one thing people felt is if you got physical with them, they would struggle with that. And we saw that a year ago, even with the 49ers. They out-physicaled Green Bay in those meetings. Sunday night, Green Bay gets to match up with a bully, a team that prides itself on physicality and pushing people around. And Green Bay not only went toe-to-toe, but delivered the knockout blows. So I got to say, more than any other team perhaps in the league right now, I'm really impressed with Green Bay, who seems to have kind of remade itself from what I envisioned coming into the year. And if Green Bay can play physical football like that with a quarterback who's playing on the level that Aaron Rodgers is playing on and a receiver like Davante Adams, who, in my opinion right now, is the offensive player of the year, they are going to be an extremely tough out. And I'm talking all the way to the Super Bowl.
I agree. What's funny is after the game, Aaron Rodgers was telling people about it. He was like, oh, yeah, we heard everyone say we hadn't played anybody. We heard people say we hadn't played a complete 4 quarters, that we don't respond well. Well, that was our response. He was like, and your mamas. I was like, okay,
Aaron at times can be so passive aggressive, and so with his dry humor, make his points and whatnot. But when he wants to bring it, he can flat out bring it, man. Just like when he's throwing a pass. When he wants to deliver it, the fastball, he knows how to deliver it.
Oh, he was amazing. And, we have a lot of other interesting storylines going to week 17. The Rams, Jared Goff breaks his thumb. We don't know if he's going to play. They're in a win. They pretty much have to win, not necessarily, but have to beat Arizona. But if he doesn't play,
they're going to John. How does a quarterback play with a broken thumb?
Yeah, I mean, I remember like Carson Wentz when he couldn't hand the ball off. He couldn't take things from under center. We saw Drew Brees couldn't do it. So let's say they go to John Wolford. You try to protect your running back with a running game, but Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, their top 2 running backs, are out with high ankle sprains.
The one thing we talk about when you start to get down to that final month of the season and more specifically the final week, health is so important. And to lose your quarterback, your top 2 running backs. Look, the reason I say I don't know how you can play with a broken thumb is beyond the obvious. Is that Jared Goff has had ball security issues even when healthy.
Yep.
So now imagine him with a bad hand trying to protect the football. I just don't see it. So the thing that's the thing that's interesting to me too, now they get to play an Arizona team which has not been playing well of late, particularly offensively. And we know that the Rams defense has been bringing it for the most part. So that's going to be an interesting matchup, even if Jared Goff doesn't play, because I think that the Rams defense is going to try and put that game on its shoulders.
Yeah, and it's interesting what's happening with Arizona, Jim, because, they look so exciting and everything early in the season. They've got D-Hop and Kyler Murray and all these guys doing things, but it's not translating, man. And so soon, I think we're going to start hearing some shouts about what Cliff Kingsbury and those guys are doing down there. We know in the coaching fraternity, there's already a lot of raised eyebrows about what's going on down there. But publicly, he's kind of gotten a pass or building and developing. So we'll see. But, Jim, the one thing going to week 17, there's a lot of great storylines on the field, off the field. And you and I are both storytellers. But Tom Rinaldi, the ESPN storyteller who's now going to take a job at Fox, who's probably, in terms of the broadcast medium, the best that there is going to be joining us in just a few minutes. And I know this, this might go over your head because it's one of the greatest rap songs ever, but it's called The Art of Storytelling by Outkast and Slick Rick. Our producer, Thomas Warren, may know what it is.
You're right. I don't know it.
Okay. But that's one thing I want to discuss with him. The art of storytelling, because, Jim, it is like when he does a feature, be it on golf or whatever, people are on Twitter like, I'm crying. Tom Rinaldi, he got me again.
Get the tissue ready.
Yeah, I mean, so it's going to be so cool having him on to talk about so much about what we do, but how he captures a story, how he finds a story, captures it, and then puts it out is to where you're riveted because he, look, as we say in our business, Jim, you're not going to hit home runs all the time. Sometimes you got to take that infield single just to get to first base. But he is knocking them out of the park time after time.
Yeah, he's the best in my opinion when it comes to broadcast storytelling, and it's one of the reasons I really wanted to have him on because one of the things we wanted to do with this podcast is not only focus on football or culture or community issues, but also the business of journalism. And look, I've said this before, but I'm always fascinated by people who are among the best at what they do, kind of what motivates them, what makes them tick, how do they do what they do, all those sorts of things. And Tom is one of those people. So to be able to have him on, this is like a master's course in journalism for any of the young journalists who are going to listen to this and who aspire to be storytellers on television or even in print. We could have kept him on for another hour or two or whatever. I had so many
Easy.
questions about it. Yeah. And I'm fascinated with people like that. And he is truly one of the best, if not the best, at what he does.
Okay, and he's won Emmys. He's won multiple Emmys.
Edward R. Murrow Awards.
Edward R. Murrow Awards. Jim, and you know him. You worked with him at ESPN. Besides being so great at what he does, he's one of the most gracious human beings in our industry.
It's a great point because when I first got to ESPN, remember, I'm coming from a print background. I've never really done television features before. I don't know anything about it, which that's another story for another day. But I remember I called Tom. He doesn't know me from Adam in terms of personally. We've never met, never talked. And I just called him. Did I call him or email? Anyway, we got on the phone together and I just wanted to pick his brain. And someone of his stature was just so gracious to give me the time that I needed to talk about, his approach to storytelling and that sort of thing. And it always stuck with me, that no matter how big you get, humility and being willing to help others, never get away from that. Never forget that you're never too big. And so I have always appreciated that about him. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who can tell a story like that. I'm sure he's done it for many others, but just a tremendous credit to the profession. And I know listeners will get a lot out of this who aspire to be storytellers in this business.
So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Rinaldi. All right, Jim, this is fantastic. Because you and I consider ourselves storytellers, but we're what do they call it? Nowadays, tier 2, maybe. But we're bringing in tier 1, like the king, right? The one everyone aspires to be, and that is now Fox's Tom Rinaldi, a former soon to be Fox, ESPN, soon to be Fox's Tom Rinaldi, one of your former colleagues. Tom, welcome so much to the Huddle and Flow podcast.
Steve, thank you for having me so much, Jim. You too. I was thrilled. Jim reached out, and it was just kind of a bit of a bolt from the blue. And as soon as you told me what it was about, I just said, are you sure you want to talk to me? And then, yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to it. And thanks so much for having me on.
Look, Steve, when you start talking about tiers, I think when it comes to Tom, we might be down at 3 or 4. Listen to this resume. Listen to this resume. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He's a 16-time National Sports Emmy winner. He's had 40 total Emmy nominations in 5 separate categories, including writing, reporting, and feature storytelling, and 7 Edward R. Murrow Awards. So, Tom, with all due respect, when we talk about the greats of storytelling, you are right up there. So we couldn't be more honored to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate you. Thank you.
I would love to do this. We have a lot of young journalists who listen to this show, and I just want to talk about the business and the process of storytelling. So I'm going to start with something that's just basic to you. What is a good story?
I think there's a difference, guys, and I think each of us learned this in our own way, and I think it took me way too long to learn it. And I think in a way, it's easily described through a visual. A report, which absolutely has value, no question. Visually, to me, a report is a line. A story is a wave. A line can take you from one point to another. It can impart knowledge to you. But does it take you up or down? Is there a low point and turning point? Or are you being taken someplace that has some dips and some curves in it, as opposed to the straight imparting of knowledge, which is more like a line? And as you take a step back and you consider what this might be that you want to impart to people, that you want to share with a readership or a viewership or audience, however it's defined now, I think thinking sometimes in those lines has helped me in terms of the visual, of the line versus the wave.
When did you realize that?
I think when I came to, and this is probably another thing that took me way too long to come to, and I'd be curious as to what you guys think. You know, we work hard, we try to churn out as best we can content with as much care as we can. But do we really take a moment, take a step back and think, what are the themes that really compel us most? What are they? And for me, this was invaluable for me. A few years ago, I did that. And I really took a step back to say, if I could try to give language to the 2 or 3 themes that compel me the most, I'm not saying every story I do is going to have one of them, but the ones that compel me most, that I most want to tell, revolve around these 3 themes. The line between living and dying, because it's inherently dramatic in terms of mortality and survival. Greatness, its pursuit, its cost, its attainment, and forgiveness. The only dynamic that really exists uniquely to humanity in all of living things. You can't find forgiveness in any other living entity on earth. Only humanity seems capable of it. So in that regard, those were the 3 themes that I found compelled me the most.
Tom, you know, we're all writers here. And this is where I think it's interesting, because as writers, I think we learn to tell stories without the visual, right? We try to take you through words, through something cosmic, so to speak. But then when you add the visual to it, it almost takes a little bit of the words away from it, right? How were you able to fuse the words and the visual and to let the images touch the heart, so to speak, or to hit the soul as opposed to the written word?
You're taking sometimes the very best thing that a subject shares, and you're using it to craft a scene through your own talent, shape, and lens. TV, it's the exact opposite of that. If you're doing a compelling interview and you find that someone is sharing something that is of the deepest and richest material, that needs to be showcased. Everything exists as a frame around that sound. The best stories, you really come away from not really with a sense of who shared it with you in TV or in the visual. The storyteller is truly secondary to the framing of the sound and the visual that brings to life the experience, the story you're trying to convey. In the written realm, that's completely different. You are so challenged with building and populating and coloring that entire world for the viewer to see, which is why, like, just to pick an example, one of the things I think Jim does so effectively in some of the longer form work he's done is he often begins, Jim, you often begin with a moment in time. You want to drop the reader, right? Immersive. Here's a moment. Let's go. The burden on the writer in that is pretty steep to try to create all at once a world that you're dropping the reader into. And from there, building out the story that might come.
When I got to ESPN, I hadn't done a lot of TV in terms of feature reporting and whatnot. And I'll never forget this. I went in with the idea that the story is not about me. And therefore, the less I am seen and the less I am heard, the better. Can I tell this story without my voice, literally my voice, or my image on TV? And I'll never forget this. A TV person came to me and said, no, that's the wrong way. You need to quickly establish this is your story, have yourself on camera, your voice heard early on. I'm curious from your standpoint, what is the right or wrong way, or how do you approach it?
Wow, Jim, that's fascinating because no one ever said that to me. Maybe because I don't have the cut of your jib. I'm not as charismatic. I'm not,
Stop,
I don't
stop,
laugh like that.
stop.
Listen, I don't know why
No,
Steve's laughing. You may
no,
want
but
to take that up with him later on that. But what I mean here, Jim, is I that's just never been the approach I think that I've taken. Although I do see the value in it. And this is what I mean. You're the viewer's proxy, Jim, right? In TV. I know, Steve, you can relate to this. That as you ask a certain kind of question, if the question's going to be used, we're all, it's ingrained in us as viewers. We want to know who's our proxy,
mm,
who's asking that question on our behalf. And so there's now an identity that comes with that. There's a connection with the viewer. And I think, Jim, your approach is correct. I think most of the time, yes, there are times where the viewer knowing who's asking the question does build connection and does have value. But many, many times, no one remembers the question. Few people remember the storyteller. They're locked in on what did that subject tell you? What did she share with you that then you can that fills the vacuum of the lens and that you work to frame?
Tom, and I think Jim and I probably have both been there, and you've probably been there. The best long form or the best stories I've told are the ones that I've become emotionally invested in. When you're, first off, do you find that to be the case? And secondly, if so, how deep does it take you where you have to say, I've got to distance myself from this, or I'm going to roll with this full throated because this is just where it's going to hit?
For some of the younger journalists, or for anyone who hasn't done a story of this nature, I'll start here. That what I think is this flawed premise that somehow big J journalist or big R reporter means you check your humanity someplace else. I think that I don't know where, I just reject that whole cloth. And I think you guys do too. Like, that would make you worse at what you're doing than better. So that's number one. Number two, each of us has felt, and it's an incredible privilege, but it's an awesome burden when someone entrusts you with his story, especially the platforms you guys are on, right? A national platform. I'm entrusting you with this precious territory in my life, in my journey, in my story. I know each of us has walked away from interviews before we've then crafted the story feeling this awesome weight. Like, how am I going to deliver on this? Right. Now, and I don't mean, and here's where people get it. I think people get it twisted. Like, not to please that person,
right.
not to somehow gloss over the difficult moments. It's to honor the trust that's been placed in you.
Tom, I'm curious about two things. Number one, I think you used a very important word there in what you were talking about, where you said trust. I think any story of consequence, there has to be a trust built up with the subject. How do you develop that trust, particularly when it's someone you don't know or you're meeting for the first time, whatever? How do you get them to a point where they're so comfortable that they will open up and tell their story to you, perhaps in a way they might not to anyone else?
It's curiosity as a first fundamental, like, to be genuinely earnestly curious about that person's experience. And how does that manifest? It manifests in really listening. Not, and oh my gosh, can I tell you how long it took me? Way too long to to begin to disregard this, to do the prep, have the questions, but then after the questions posed, I think back to the people I interviewed earlier in my career. They're saying something of great meaning, and what am I doing? I'm looking down at the pad. I mean, that's just horrendous. And I did that. I mean, so many times. Like, what's my next question? What? Listen to what that person is sharing with you, and then follow it up, because that's where I think some of that trust comes through. I mean, oh my God, I cringe when I think of the things that the interviews I botched, and the ways that I didn't foster that connection or trust the way any human being should, because I was worried about, the job and being a reporter versus, okay, let me just listen to you here. I mean, be prepared, know the through lines, know the flow of the interview, know the points to explore. So, and the last thing I'd say, Jim, is I really think it's sometimes by saying something. Let's say you're going to cover some difficult stuff. There's a few ways to do that, but one is to say, if it's me and you, Jim, to say, Jim, I'm going to pay you the respect of asking you some of these difficult things in a very straightforward way. You answer in whatever way you wish, but just know that the questions come from a place of deep respect. And the other thing, sometimes when we do difficult interviews or interviews with people in difficult situations, sometimes there's this other fallacy that it took me too long to work through. In the so-called accountability interview, where you're speaking to somebody who's been through something difficult or who's been the subject of public criticism or scrutiny, we're not here and the other person isn't here. We're here. That's all. We're just here. That doesn't mean that you're quote unquote soft or you're not asking the appropriate question, but there's a way to do that in a direct, respectful, fair way. I'm not saying I live up to that all the time, but I try to keep that in mind. I'm sure you guys are like, I'll hit you with a question here. I'll start with Steve, to the degree you're comfortable to share it.
Mm-hmm.
The toughest response you ever got back from a piece?
Wow. And look, and a lot of people might be thinking I'm getting cussed out or something like that. But the toughest response I ever got, I did a story on a boxer named Phil Jackson. And to me, when I talk about the great stories I've done as boxers, because anybody who gets beat up for a living or is willing to risk their life for a living, it's just incredible stories, right? But I did a big takeout story on Phil Jackson, who grew up in Overtown down in Miami when I was working down at the Miami Herald. And my raw copy that went in for the edit told the story. When it came out of the edit is when I was like, this isn't what I meant, right? This isn't what this guy is living, right? This guy had like 5, 6, 7 kids. He'd been locked up. He was going to fight Lennox Lewis for the championship.
Wow.
This was the fight to get him out of Overtown. So the theme was the fight to get him out of Overtown, but the hold that Overtown had on him, and is getting out really what he wants to do, right? That was the theme. And when it came out like he was really on Overtown. And so I read the piece and was like, this isn't it. And when I got the phone call from him and his people, he's like, man, I can't go back to Overtown.
Wow.
He's like, these people hate me because, and when I think about it and I think about the editing process of it, it was from people who never had set foot in Overtown, from people who never had to knock on somebody's window to see if they could come in, if it was safe to come in, or if they can get a bite to eat, because there was nothing like it was edited through a prism of eyes that had never walked the footsteps that I walk with this guy even for a couple of days. Right. And so when it came out, I was like, oh, can you imagine this guy grew up here and now he's saying that the people there who he trusted hated him.
Wow.
And that was me being young and being afraid to tell, some editors like, this isn't it. Hold the story or something like that. But that was by far, I mean, I could not, to this day, I can't reconcile that. I mean, it was really like, geez, that's a kick in the gut when you talk about the harshest response you ever get. Not getting cussed out, somebody calling you saying, I can't go back.
Jim?
Yeah, I don't think it's, well, at least for me personally, I don't think it's ever when anyone is angry at me. It's more when they're disappointed in me.
Right.
That's when I feel it, because you feel like you've let someone down, that you haven't told their story correctly. If there's one story with me that sticks out, it wasn't a reaction. And I tell this story to young journalists too. You're going to find yourself at times in some very difficult situations where your character is going to be tested. And for me, I happened to be a high school writer in San Diego, and I was covering East County sports. And there was a young girl out there who was the most prolific three-point shooter in county history. Really talented. Well, one day, her father kills the wife and then turns the gun on himself. So it's a murder-suicide. And so I remember I get in the office and I've got the news desk saying, can you call them and get, call her and get some sort of response? And I'm thinking to myself, she's just lost her mother and her father. Again, I'm a young reporter, so I want to make my way. And so I remember I called the house, and the grandmother answered and knew who I was and whatnot, because I had written on her fairly extensively. And the grandmother actually put her on the phone. And at that point, I had a decision to make. And are you going to be a reporter, or are you going to be a human being? And so I simply said to her, I'm so sorry for your loss. And if there's anything I can do, because she was crying, I said, just let me know. And then I went back to the desk and I said, there's no comment. Was I wrong? From a reporter standpoint, probably. From a human standpoint, not at all. And I don't regret it.
But Jim, and I would love to get Steve's take on that. Like, why do you even say, was I wrong from the reporter standpoint? Maybe. Why?
Because we all have a job to do in life. And our job as a reporter is to ask difficult questions in difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
And for everyone, your level of, humanity may be different. And for me, I just could not ask that teenage girl about losing both her mom and dad on that day. I just couldn't. Not for print, not putting her out like that. Now, maybe as time passes and she wants to discuss it, that's a different story. But it's just too fresh, too raw. And so that's what I say to young reporters. There are going to be times you find yourself in those situations, and no one can answer those questions but you.
I want to get you on this because you've had so many, great experience, college football, golf, the variety of sports, the variety of personalities. Is there a genre, so to speak? Like you heard me say, like to me, boxers and the sport of boxing is where the greatest human stories come from. But is there a genre that you've come across where you get some of the best stories that you like to tell?
Listen, it's hard to equal individual sport. You're out there. Tennis, right? Boxing, golf. It's you. You're out there. You're exposed. You're vulnerable. And there's so many compelling stories in that vein. On the team side, I know I will always be fascinated by and drawn toward coaches. Because there's so much, I think, maybe in the college game, more than the pro game. There's so much involved in that role. I mean, they are outsized figures, not only at their schools, not only sometimes in their sport, in their state, in their region, coaches were in all these, the player got hurt, the player was homesick, whatever it may be. I just think there's a lot that's fascinating to me about coaches and about individual athletes. I mean, athletes in individual sport.
How do you, two-part question, how do you find your stories? And then what is your process in terms of prepping for those stories?
So listen, in our business, as we know, the greatest currency comes in ideas. And I could even say in our business, and scratch that out, in any pursuit, the greatest currency is the idea. Having said that, I am below the Mendoza line in pitching stories, and anybody at ESPN will tell you that. I mean, I get fewer than 2 of 10 through and across the line. Certainly, I mean, I just don't. One of the wonderful things, and I hope you guys, I mean, I think you guys can relate to this, is when you do have the nation as a canvas in whatever particular sport, or even when you're in a big city, or when you're in Miami, the canvas is big, and one story can sometimes lead to the next story. People like the way you rendered something. People happen to, and those are where the stories tend to come from. That and boy, I can never say this enough to young journalists. Read. People don't read.
Don't read.
It's unbelievable. There's such incredible content out there, and people don't read. Plus, you're not only getting ideas, think about sometimes the best ideas that are buried in the 18th graph, where you just see that nugget about the ancillary character. And you're like, wait a second, what? Maybe that's an even better story.
Tom, I want to go back to what we were just talking about, because, just kind of being in an uncomfortable or a peculiar or navigating through the start of an interview through it. I believe you were the first person to interview Tiger after he had the car accident, the whole affair, stuff became public. Okay, now you clearly had a trust with him from your years of covering him and dealing with him. But what was that like? Because this is the personal Tiger that few of us had to see, and he's now got some illicit negative coverage or behavior that's being exposed. So how would you go into that interview and tell the story using his words and giving him that forum, but also maybe not giving him an out when we know there's some information there that says otherwise?
So, Steve, a couple of things for context, just so people know, right? We were able to do the first interview with Tiger. There were conditions, but nothing that limited us in terms of the scope of what we could ask. But the conditions were real and they were challenging. 5 minutes, no more. And these next two may strike you as odd. Standing and outside. Now, why those? Think about it. Feels less confessional if you're standing than if you're seated. Feels somehow less intimate if it's outside rather than inside. So these were smart on from his camp. I think they were very, very smart conditions. And the other thing is, if you're going wildly over the 5 minutes, if you're standing and you're outside, exit visas are imminent, and right, see ya, and I'm walking off. So I think all that made sense. So I think the interview turned out to be maybe 5.5 minutes or so. We never shared with Tiger anything that we were going to ask ahead of time, but I did chat with him briefly beforehand. I went aside with him and I told him some of the simplest things that you can imagine. Like, Tiger, the questions are what you would expect them to be. And if they strike you as hard, that won't be a surprise. It's what you're going through is hard. And you don't need a guy, with a bad haircut from Jersey to come here and tell you that. You're living it. Another thing I said to him was, if I cut you off at any time, it's not out of a lack of respect or attentiveness. It's solely a byproduct of the time limit. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I said to him is, just know this, that it can be easy to forget no matter what we're going through in a time that's challenging. There's a simple truth that can be easy to overlook. And that is that there is a tomorrow. And that whenever it comes, by your definition, know this, that me and Diane and the kids however you define it, we wish for your success. We do. And then, very shortly after that, we did the interview. And I remember people suggesting to me, if unless you're soft, if you don't, he'll never speak to you again if you do it properly, and all those things. And I've said this to people who are close to me in my life, know this, guys. For whatever reason, I'm telling you, Tiger Woods has been fantastic with me, not only through my career professionally, but when I've gone through difficult moments and moments of loss in my life, he has reached out to me. He has expressed his own caring and concern for me, which is amazing to me, considering who he is and all the other things that come with that degree of fame. And, I think, again, to go back to this, guys, I'd like to think that I asked the questions fairly, respectfully, directly. But what I didn't do was ask them from here or here. I tried to ask them that way as best I could.
Tom, I'm curious as to your interviews all come off so polished, and obviously you're well prepared. And I think that's something young people need to remember, that preparation is key. As Russell Wilson likes to say, the separation is in the preparation. But I'm wondering at the same time, we all have been in those situations where you have the awkward interview. And no matter how much you prepare, that subject sometimes just doesn't really want to give up anything. How do you deal with that when you find yourself in those moments?
Oh my gosh, where do you want to begin, Jim? And I've been in those, situations, and sometimes they're just live and out there. It isn't like, well, we can go back and take care of that in the edit. It's happening just in the moment. And I have tremendous respect for and am pretty compelled by Naomi Osaka. As an incredible athlete, an incredible story. I think someone who this year at the U.S. Open, who decided.
What do you think?
Right. What do you think?
What do you
wear
think?
the seven masks for the 7 matches, with the foresight to do that with the 7 names. And I thought I asked her what I would consider to be as neutral and open-ended a question as I could, in a moment of absolute triumph for her, and to say,
Yes.
What message were you sending? Well, what message did you get?
Right.
And I did not answer in that moment for 2, I think, pretty obvious reasons. And yeah, was it awkward because I just didn't answer? Perhaps, but A, it's not my moment. It's her moment. And B, I think that in a sense, I'm listening to whatever else she might say. And so she did, as the interview went on live. But believe me, I've certainly been in those spots, and I come away from them, and sometimes I cringe, and I think, oh my goodness, was that, did that come out or come across as rough as it felt in the moment?
Well, I remember watching that, and I literally thought to myself, what would you have done in that situation? Meaning me.
What would you have done, Jim? Would
I
you have
don't know.
answered?
Tom, it's so. First of all, it's easy to sit back now in hindsight
No,
and
I
say
get
what I
that.
would have
But
done.
even with that benefit, would you have answered her?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I can't give you an answer. I just thought, man, what an uncomfortable situation for her to turn that around on you and ask
But there
that
was a
question.
power in that from her.
Oh, there was. It doesn't make it any
Absolutely.
less awkward.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I've interviewed her in the past, and again, I'll use my stock line. It's not like we're going whitewater rafting next weekend, but I know her, and that was her answer in that moment. And I respect that immensely. I respect her.
I'm just curious what your process is for telling a story. How do you go about it? You do your research, obviously, and one of the benefits of being at an ESPN or someplace else, and I think people, they don't get enough credit, are the producers who will help prepare you for a story in terms of providing research material, all those sorts of things. But let's say you've got all your research material What is your process for then going about telling your story, telling a story?
Again, I think, Jim, and I don't know, I find the interviews so foundational. They are, I mean, the importance of an interview in a TV feature to me can never be overstated. They're the absolute cornerstones from which to build the story. Then sometimes I think we think, okay, let's identify the chronology if it exists. Let's try to think about what the key points along that line are, but then also consider theme and consider character. Don't just be locked into the next point on the line. Consider theme and consider character. Consider what someone has shared in the interview, which doesn't fit so neatly into the spine of a chronology. And I think those are the ways ultimately that the body of the story grows its flesh and becomes fuller.
When you are considered one of the best at what you do, which you are, as Mike Tomlin would say, the standard is the standard. And so you're expected to hit a grand slam. I'm using all these metaphors here. Every time you deliver a piece, is there pressure in that for you? Do you, how do you measure whether or not you've succeeded in reaching that standard?
What a great question, Jim. I mean, and I'll toss that back to you because I think you guys on stories of this kind of note, and it isn't every story, thank goodness, but on the stories where someone has placed great trust in you, you guys already know the answer. Did I honor it? Did I honor the trust? Did I deliver? Not the, hey, I can't ever go back to Overtown. Do you realize that? Do you realize that? Like the opposite of that. To have somebody say, I've heard from people I haven't heard from in years. This is bringing other people back into my life. Listen, there's a trinity that I think we all try to follow, right? Accuracy, got to get it right. Empathy, am I doing my best to just connect with you? And curiosity, how much am I really earnestly interested in what you're taking the time and the vulnerability costs to share? I've never been on social media. I'm not on any social media platform. The only way I know what anybody thinks outside my sphere, my family, my friends, the people who I work for, or if somebody sends me something explicitly or directly.
The story you did that I cannot watch enough is Arthur the dog.
Yeah.
And if you could explain that story, because when I saw it, I was like, no way. Okay, well, how's this going to end? No way. And it's continued getting better and better and better. So if you could explain that story, because I can't watch it enough. I can't. The story was just so incredible. And that's where I was just like, how the hell did he get this?
Okay, so two things, and I'm going to brace you. Okay. First of all the credit in the world goes to Kristen Lapis. Jim, I don't know if you ever had the chance to cross paths with Kristen. She's an absolute superstar as a producer. I mean, like walks on water superstar. And she's the one who found the story, which had gotten a lot of traction in that part of the world, but really hadn't crossed over to the States. So she's the one who became aware of it, brought it to me. We pitched it, and God bless our betters who said, yeah, going through this story on world adventure racing and this dog. And for those who don't know it, I just suggest that if you want to go and watch it. It's just an improbable story about a world adventure racing team, which is, again, for our generation, kind of like the Eco Challenge, where people have to traverse through different terrains in a race style format. And this stray dog that for some reason connects itself to this one team and its captain and the decision that he has to make. Okay, Steve, Arthur just died.
Oh, how long did he live, though? Because he seemed like he was a quite the adult dog when you did the piece.
He did. He lived a long time. He was sick here through 2020, but just a few weeks ago, he died.
Mm.
And anyone who's obviously any dog lover knows that it's losing a piece of yourself. You judge how much, but a piece of yourself. But in this case, again, if you see the story that Steve refers to,
Oh
the
man.
unbelievable effort that this team captain went through government bureaucracy and red tape and all these other things to not only sacrifice his own competitive wish and drive to save this dog, but then to take the dog from one continent to another and give the dog a home that Arthur would have never had otherwise. It just, again, Kristen Lapis is just such a goddess, and I'm so grateful to her that she had me be a part of telling that story.
One thing that you said about all this, you and Tom, is that even beyond the dog, what I took from this is the story about human character. And this team leader had a decision to make. And you could learn so much about that individual based on the decision that he makes. So that's the part that's great about storytelling. There are so many layers to stories, and then the question becomes, the really talented ones like Tom are able to find those layers and to bring them out.
But the other great thing, guys, that we know is at such an awfully divided and divisive and difficult time. I've said this before. I don't know what your take is. The institution that we happen to cover is by definition the most starkly divisive of all. You won and you lost.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't get any more stark than that. And yet it retains, and I know people are going to say that I'm a Pollyanna. Listen, it's got all kinds of problems as an institution. We've written about that. We've each covered that in our own ways. I get it. But at least for me, and I think for you guys too, it retains a magic. It retains this ability to unite, to inspire, to put out into the world stories of greatness and excellence and its pursuit and the sacrifice and the bonding and it is such a great area to work in. Sport is. It's just the best.
I think we can close on that note. That is the absolute truth.
Well, Tom, we absolutely appreciate you because you're the best. And looking back at what you've done, it's been incredible. We know where you're headed. It's going to be even better. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Huddle and Flow podcast.
I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. You guys indulged me like no one in my house ever would. So I appreciate you so much.
No, I look forward to seeing your work, man. Continue the great work. Steve, I said it would be educational. Look, we've been in this business. I'll speak for myself. I've been in this business since I graduated in 1986 from Howard. And you're always learning. You never stop learning. And so to be able to listen to a guy like Tom, to hear his approach, his process, his mindset with a story, there's so much I took away from it and so much I'm going to try and apply, the next time I'm doing a broadcast feature, or even, like I say, there are components to that you can take and apply to print. So just so much respect for Tom. And I think this is going to benefit a lot of young journalists out there.
And and the fact now he's changing jobs at this point of his career. I mean, first off, it's like, okay, it's nice to be in demand at this point of your career, but with another network, just understanding what he can bring them.
But let's say this too, and we said this, off air. It's one thing to talk about wanting to be on to be able to do NFL and Major League Baseball and all these things and making the change, but it also doesn't hurt that reportedly your salary gets doubled. So one thing I say to people, even players, never be afraid to say that it's about the money too. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay.
But at this point of his career, I mean, think about it. A lot of people are like, okay, he's that guy. He is in this lane. we can find a young person and develop that next person. And Fox was like, we want him, and we're going to pay him that money because he will bring stories to us. Super Bowl, World Cup, Major League Baseball, golf. Another story where a dog is finds some of these super triathletes, super Ironman runners, whatever. And again, what he does, Jim, ESPN's lucky to have had him to have it on a sports genre. His stories could go on the Today Show, evening news, whatever, because they're just so monumental. For him to give us some of his time to make us better at what we do, like you said, to think about what we do, was just absolutely fabulous. All right, so this was one of those episodes, Jim, I think that it'll resonate a certain way. But I think Tom Rinaldi, being who he is, you out there really were treated to something special. So on that note, Jim, why don't you bring us home?
Yeah, we thank you for listening. We thank you for subscribing. Please leave us your comments so that we can give you more of what you're funking for.
All right. And you can find us on iTunes and on Spotify, and also hit that little search thing there too, Jim, and find The Art of Storytelling by Outkast and Slick Rick. You'll be bobbing your head when you're on the Peloton. We know what's up with that. All right, everybody. Thank you. We'll be back later this week with University of Maryland head coach Mike Loxley. And Jim, real quick before we get out of here, Mike has got this coalition for minority coaches, and we know come the end of next week or beginning of next week, there's going to be some coaches getting fired, some GMs getting fired. And what his coalition is doing is trying to introduce a lot of viable, qualified candidates, as we've tried to do, to owners, college presidents, and whatnot. So this is going to be a really, really important discussion from somebody who's deep in the trenches and really is trying to do the right thing and try to balance the scales.
No question. It's all about, at this point for Michael, it's not about identifying the problem. We know what the problem is. It's trying to find solutions. And he's got a powerful group behind him. But we'll get into more of that next week, but definitely worth your time.
All right, for our producer, Thomas Warren, my guy, Jim Trotter, I'm Steve Weitz. We are the Howard Mob, and we are out.